The Chicken Tooth Company is dead. Long live the Chicken Tooth Company. So Rooster Teeth, the company which produced RWBY, came undone back in May. And honestly, I can't say I was shocked. I think a lot of folks who had grown weary of both the company and the show had seen the writing on the wall for a while up until that point. Endless controversies regarding high-ranking company members being outright predators, routine whistleblowers on company culture being rife with bigotry, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and just generally crunching anybody who wasn't considered a marketable face, and generally failing to assess what it is people actually want. Like, y'all had so many shows that, I'm gonna be real, nobody wanted. Like, what the hell is Dog Bark? What is that? It was clear beforehand that RWBY really was the company's big moneymaker, and it's even clearer now, which meant that not only with more viewers swearing off the show and losing interest, but a lengthy hiatus caused by the company's inability to manage their projects, the company was going a long time after Volume 8's finale without that sweet RWBY money to keep them on life support. And really, as their parent company Warner Media struggled plenty on their own, it's also not surprising they struggled to find a buyer for Rooster Teeth. Aside from RWBY and Red vs. Blue, what do they have that's really worth the purchase? It is a sad thing for sure, given how many people did find themselves fond of the company, its persona, and its star personalities for over 2 decades. Truthfully, my chief concern lies with all the animators and low-level artists who had been treated like dirt by the company for years, some of those years in which I played a part in downplaying their mistreatment. That I profusely apologize for. And since the company's dissolution, I hope those artists have since been able to find better footing, be they properly employed artists who had been laid off beforehand, or contract animators who'd been brought in to replace them for cheaper. Not that that's an easy task given the animation industry and many industries right now are basically anti-worker hellscapes. It is morbidly funny though, given the company also produced a RWBY game in which one of the villains is a union leader.
Hanlon Fifestone, Mantle's most celebrated union leader.
Bruh.
Wow, not even hiding it anymore. Not that they were in the first place by making the civil rights activists villains either, but you know. Oh god, and the union leader is also one of the few black character. What the fuck, guys? So with Rooster Teeth's demise, it does beg the question of what will happen to RWBY as an IP. It has since been purchased by Viz Media, an anime and manga licensing company, which is an interesting choice. To my knowledge, Viz mostly specializes in publishing and dubbing rather than producing. Perhaps they'll license RWBY out to someone else at some point. Truth be told, I think RWBY as a brand could use some time off, considering the sour taste that it's left for many. It is deeply depressing that someone's beloved, heartfelt creation can be sold for parts among wealthy corporations led by apathetic executives. However, in such a terribly structured world, I am still incredibly bitter Dylan Goo did not get it, but that's just me. Hey Viz, license Dylan to make yourself Volume 10 and or a reboot. I'm just saying. Now, it might seem odd I'm only talking about all of this now, many months later. Where was all this when the news of Rooster Teeth's collapse was fresh? And the answer is that I wanted a break from all things Rooster Teeth and RWBY. My history with both have been quite turbulent over the years. And while I know most folks were receptive to my being more critical, but still loving of the show, I have to admit, it was nice leaving it behind to focus on other things, other stories and properties with far less hostile, reactionary followings. Even now, I am admittedly quite nervous to open this door again, knowing what the reactions of some will be. But in honesty, that also provides some freedom, knowing that the people who will endlessly rant about my work and mischaracterize people like me simply for critiquing a thing they like will do so regardless of how many disclaimers I include. Every time I critique something, I make it a point to tell you that I am not telling you how to feel, that I feel no ill will towards you for our disagreements, and most of you understand and respect this. And for that, I am grateful. But it is also time to stop kowtowing to the small group of people who throw this aside as an excuse to harass and demonize. All of this has translated into me never really publicly sharing my feelings on RWBY Volume 8 as a whole, or anything from Volume 9. And God's help me, because I regularly forget the Justice League movies exist. Even as I haven't spoken about it publicly, RWBY has remained with me, a disease which chronically flares up now and again, reminding me of how cool it once seemed and how cool it could have been in better hands. Alas, my condition is beyond recovery, and one of the few treatments, aside from casual 3D modeling as a hobby, yelling about it with close friends in private, and perusing various fan works that understand the show far better than the late Chicken Company, is yelling about it for money online. So in a world where everything must be monetized, might as well monetize my malady. So today we shall be finding closure. We shall look back upon the last 2 volumes of RWBY, as well as... Actually, you know what? Fuck those god-awful crossover movies. I ain't touching them. I love myself too much to sit through those again. But for volumes 8 and 9, we're going to discuss their many, many flaws, but also the glimmers of promise within. Because as usual, RWBY is a master of the art of, cool idea, what the fuck is this execution? And in that, maybe we will find that even if RWBY never finishes its tale, there can still be peace in that. Before we begin... Ciao! If you're new here, my name's Thomas, aka the Unicorn of War, and I talk about whatever the fuck I like, usually media discussions. And if you like what you find here, then you can subscribe to the channel and ring that bell for notifications, because YouTube hates creators. You can also pledge your support for myself and the channel over on Patreon. Perks include early access videos and scripts, exclusive videos to certain tiers, and access to the private Union of War Discord server. Now without further ado, let the chaos commence. Volume 8 is my most hated volume of RWBY. Now, I don't think it's the worst on a technical level. That award would have to go to Volume Let's Sit Around and Wait for the Villains to Kill Us All 5, though you must admit, 8 inherited a lot of 5's problems. But no, for me, Volume 8 is the culmination of all the show's worst problems. A betrayal of everything the show could be if it just tried, transforming what should be an action-packed, emotionally heavy war into a boring, baffling slog. Having everyone except for Team RWBY be treated as protagonists, failing to create a cohesive tone as we yo-yo between melodrama and deeply unfunny slapstick.
Another thing I don't want to do. Ever again.
Misunderstanding how character goals and motivations work, and still being concerned with mystery and endless setup rather than focusing on payoff. The only reason I keep revisiting Volume 8 is because of a morbid fascination of how it fumbles at every turn, of how it flirts with the idea of greatness, only to go right back to RWBY's usual storytelling woes. So, where Volume 7 left off, on Ironwood abandoning Mantle, Penny becoming the Winter Maiden, and Salem arriving with an army of Grimm to lay siege to Atlas, Volume 8 centers on that siege. Team RWBY is trying to find a way to save both Atlas and Mantle, finding themselves against not only Salem's forces, but also Ironwood's army. And for all of that, this volume really doesn't feel all that much more intense or dire than any other volume. You would think a volume where the big bad finally rocks up and lays siege to our kingdom would have an action-packed opener, really set the stakes while getting people hooked immediately. But no. Salem just kind of sits there menacingly in her whale, doing nothing.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
I assume scrolling on her scroll. Does the whale get good Wi-Fi? And even when she does attack a few episodes in, it's just shots of Grimm armies fighting faceless soldiers and robots. There is no emotional investment whatsoever, and naturally we always cut away before we have to animate any actual fighting. And I must admit, on top of all the issues of Team RWBY causing their own problems in regards to Ironwood, their concern for Mantle kind of falls flat, considering that Atlas is clearly the main target. When Salem invades, we don't see Mantle being swarmed or overwhelmed with Grimm, probably because Mantle doesn't have anything Salem actually wants. The vault holding the Staff of Creation is in Atlas, not Mantle, and Salem isn't actively holding Mantle hostage to play up the divide between Team RWBY and Ironwood, so who cares? And speaking of the general, ooh, girl, that writing. For an in-depth analysis on where the writers failed, which is everywhere, I recommend Twin Ink's video on the subject. But to recap, the writers essentially amplified Ironwood's negative traits to transform him from a morally gray antagonist into a clearly evil caricature. The dude behaves like a cartoon villain determined to remind us that Team RWBY can do no wrong. And all the while, I'm just wondering what the writers think moral grayness even is. It is undoubtedly one of the most contentious, hated elements of the Atlas arc, especially for me. And everyone has pretty much covered this topic better than I could. Everything's already been said. But I would just like to briefly say, fuck his semblance. Apparently, the writers learned nothing from all the complaints of hiding their exposition in supplemental material, and decided to only mention Ironwood's semblance outside of the show in interviews. According to them, his semblance is called metal. Get it? Because, you know, he's got a lot of metal, you know, which causes him to hyperfixate to solve a problem. His semblance is neurodivergence. Not only is this incredibly dull, but also just so gross and sleazy, and unshocking given the show's history of mishandling mature topics. All that aside, if you were to only watch the show, you wouldn't even know this semblance exists in the first place, so why would you even bring it up? What kept y'all from mentioning it in show or finding a visual or auditory cue for it? In theory, it does make sense to have Ironwood become an antagonist. He is the heartless Tin Woodsman, who instead of realizing he was capable of compassion all along, is instead a military dictator who decides to uphold order by subjugating the people, using brute force and raw strength to keep people in line, and viewing those he's sworn to defend as threats to peace and as weaknesses against Salem. And initially, the show did an admittedly decent job at making him interesting and even sympathetic, while still communicating the potential threats he posed. They could have done more with that in the early volumes if they realized he and his army, from a kingdom built upon not only rigid class division, but also anti-faunus racism and exploitation, were probably bigger threats than the group asking for equal rights. But what can you do? But Ironwood's fumbling really shows the writer's inability to handle these darker, more nuanced topics. They brag about handling moral grayness all the while doing everything they can to convert them into purely black and white conflicts where Team RWBY is never in the wrong. And if they are, then we ought to console them rather than critique them. Now, before we talk about Team RWBY, we should talk about one of the symptoms of the show refusing to write them as protagonists. The real protagonist of Volume 8, Penny. Well, one of its real protagonists. More on that one later. I've talked before about my issues with Penny in Volume 8 with my video, Penny Deserved Better. But to recap, why did y'all bring her back only to kill her again immediately? I mean, I know why. To draw back in people who left the show in droves, and then use that cheap ploy to even more cheaply exploit their love for Penny to make them cry. Well, guess what? I didn't cry at her death. I felt nothing, because it was so clear she was nothing more than a tool to you. Ironic, given her story was meant to be about being more than a tool. In a story that should be about Penny finding agency, being able to make choices for herself, no one bothered to ask her how she felt about becoming human. No, we decided instead that she needed to be. Because despite what RWBY told us so many years ago, her being different is the root cause of her problems. And even then, she must still die. But not at the hands of someone who actually knew her or loved her, but at the hands of Jean, who has endless room in his refrigerator for red-haired women. Women whose legacies begin and end at his angst. And like the women who live on as a source for his angst, Team RWBY got shafted for his dramatic moment. Like, you know, that's nothing new for Team RWBY. Even beyond Jean, the girlies with the colors, who were once the stars of the color trailers, once again find themselves on the back burner while everyone else gets the spotlight. Oscar is the one to take on Salem, Ren and Nora are the ones with romantic development, Penny is the one with the most important arc, the Aesops get lots and lots of angst about following orders. Even Cinder finds herself with a story of redemption, not of absolving herself of evil, but of rising to become an actually competent villain. Well, semi-competent. After the split and their mission into the compound, RWBY, Weiss, and Blake find themselves sitting around Weiss's empty manor drinking tea as they debate whether to partake in the plot as a war rages outside. And ultimately, they don't have to, because Oscar blows up the Hell Whale for them. I mean, at least Yang was in the same room as Salem, I guess, you know? You only got 2 sentences to say to the big bad, but whatever. You know, the creators have gone on record to say that they wish they called the show Remnants and not RWBY. Guess what, guys? We can tell. What story do the girls even have in Volume 8? RWBY's just general angst over her bad decisions and nothing else, not doing anything about them, just kind of wallowing in them. While Weiss, Blake, and Yang have no real arcs of their own. No character growth, no moments of reflection or glory, just existing while other characters get all the shine. Side note, who the hell decided hiding in Weiss's giant mansion was a good idea? You are Atlas's most wanted, yet somehow no one thought to look for you in Weiss's house that is visible from a goddamn academy. Ironwood never thought to have some of his robots monitoring it in case they drop by, I guess. Also, something that pissed me off. Why is this the first time Team RWBY has ever fought Cinder? Cinder has been one of our main antagonists since Volume 1. She murdered Pyrrha, and yet Team RWBY never got the chance to fight her until 8 years into the show. How? Why is the option always for Cinder to fight someone other than them? Be it Jean or Raven or Penny and Winter, it adds to this disconnect between Team RWBY and the plot. And even then, there's no real catharsis in this fight, because most of it is Cinder ignoring RWBY to instead fight Penny and Weiss. And when she does finally pay attention to RWBY, it's to send her falling into the void, which, why is RWBY our lead character the second to fall into the abyss along with Blake? Why is Weiss the last one standing alongside John and Penny? In fiction, the first and last to do something are generally considered the most important. Specifically, things that happen later on or last are given more dramatic weight. They hold more gravitas. So by having RWBY falling in the middle, you are essentially admitting she don't matter. It's actually kind of hilarious how spot on this is to how the show has always regarded her role. Like, wow, y'all ain't even hiding it. And even worse, why did Team RWBY not encounter Salem? She is our true main antagonist, our big bad, yet our leading ladies didn't even bother having a run-in with her. Yang gets the closest by calling her out, but the scene focuses mostly on Oscar and Hazel doing battle with her instead. Utterly insane, especially since Salem dropped the summer bombshell on RWBY last volume, and we get no follow-up here. Shifting to Salem, wow, her writing is so inconsistent, it pisses me off, and her presence is deeply underwhelming. She is just generic Dark Lord number 7, ominously smirking around every corner, insulting Cinder and shooting ugly-looking laser beams to pretend that she's scary. Like, no, her stretching to reform and grab people is not scary. She looks like one of those wavy blow-up balloon men outside of a car dealership. Salem's whole deal is supposed to be manipulation, her ability to exploit people's darkest impulses to divide them or turn them to her side. Working with her is supposed to be like a deal with the devil, promising you what you want in exchange for your help and your soul. So explain to me why instead of negotiating with people based on their motivations, she instead decides to just terrorize everyone into doing what she wants. She tries torturing Oscar into giving up information about the relics, and even has Hazel do it for her, but why? Like, on a real note, torture does not fucking work. Ever. It just makes people tell you what they think you want to hear to make the immediate pain stop. It's about as effective as a polygraph test. And moreover, Oscar already has plenty of reasons to turn on Oz. Becoming Oz's host has caused him incredible amounts of distress, not to mention the threat of losing himself as their souls merge, and also being accosted by drunk uncles. Offer Oscar a way out of that, and you have a shot at him revealing Oz's secrets of his own volition. And also, that way, we don't have to sit through the darkest member of the main cast being brutalized unnecessarily because the writers think physically torturing characters equals this being a more mature show. And also, why does no one know what her goal is? Everyone's on different pages, apparently. Hazel thinks she's gonna make a new world order, and so does Mercury. Cinder never says, because truth be told, I don't think she gives a shit. And Tyrion and Oz say that she's ending the world. But Salem herself never says what her goal is. She even just casually says, in pursuit of a new world, which has me thinking that Hazel might have actually been correct. But why? Why are we, the audience, still being kept in the dark about the goal of our big bad? If there were ever a time to learn, now would be it. Is it because the writers don't know what her goal is yet? And moreover, why do none of her minions seem to know? Did no one think to double check with her agenda before joining under her? If she's ending the world, why would you want that? Tyrion, sure, if he's just a slavish disciple of his goddess. As boring as that is, I guess that tracks. But the rest of you? Idiots. Will say I at least dig her evil lair. Monstro reference aside, her lair being a living creature, this giant whale grim, makes an intimidating mobile fortress, especially with all the gross sinew and bone composing the chambers. The ribcage air hanger, genuinely genius. Love it, chef's kiss. Reminds me a lot of the Atlantis levels of OG Tomb Raider. Now, back to things I hate. I love that you can tell that the fights just are not a core pillar of RWBY anymore by the fact that our big bad has no weapon. And her fighting style is just generic energy blasts. Magic is incredibly uncreative and bland in RWBY. No spells, no incantations, no unique aesthetics for magic users. Just rave lights and basic elemental blasts. Truth be told, even the fact that the relics aren't weapons is an insult. One of them is a sword, for crying out loud. You couldn't find a way to have them make for top tier innovative combat, maybe, I don't know, transform into more obvious weapons, and instead just have them be boring magical paperweights. Like, good lord, now that the lamp is out of questions, it's just fucking useless now. Can't even use it for a fight unless you, like, I don't know, hit someone in the back of the head with it. Cinder, as I alluded to before, weirdly comes off as the real protagonist of Volume 8. We start with her echoing back to her past, then get her full backstory a few episodes in. She gets her moment to be called out for her many flaws and failures by Watts, and in the end, she learns from them to win the day, defeating Team RWBY, securing the relics, and killing Watson, presumably Neo, because petty. Good for her. Except no, fuck her. These are a woman's wrongs I do not support. Cinder has been a very lacking antagonist since, well, forever. Wanting power for apparently no other reason than wanting power, and losing at every turn since Volume 3. Yeah, she killed Pyrrha, but she was also somehow severely wounded by Ruby's silver eyes, even though silver eyes are only meant to hurt Grimm, and yet she lost human appendages. But you know what? Who fucking cares at this point? Cinder then lost her fight with Raven in Volume 5 and lost the Winter Maiden power to Penny in Volume 7. She became an angsty laughingstock real quick. And truthfully, I am not sure why we only just got her backstory now in Volume 8. Sure, she's from Atlas, at least she moved there when she was adopted or enslaved. I'm still not sure what the hell she was. But why were we made to wait until this moment to learn her story? Again, things which happen later in the story hold more dramatic weight, which means that Cinder's generic-ass backstory is meant to be more important than that of our big bad Salem. Routinely, Volume 8 is described as Cinder's volume, and I'm sitting here like, she had her chance at her volume. Volume 5, let this be Salem's volume, you fucking fools! And on the note of the backstory, it's just Cinderella except she kills her stepfamily. How original. Sure, it explains her never wanting to feel helpless again, but it's not particularly compelling. The only real detail I find compelling is that she always tries to cover her neck to hide the scar where the collar was. That's about it. Perhaps this would feel less frustrating if we weren't made to, I don't know, wait years for it, nearly a decade. I'd honestly have dropped this back in Volume 4 during Cinder's recovery, when she weirdly came off as sympathetic due to how weak she was, and for some reason was scared of Tyrion, even though it's like, girl, you've committed murder, get over it. And connected to Cinder, Emerald. Emerald just really shows the lack of attention given to character motivations. From jump, Emerald has been loyal to Cinder, which is the only reason she went along with Salem in Volumes 4 and 5. So in Volume 8, when Emerald betrays Salem to join the heroes, it is so bewildering that Cinder doesn't factor into this twist at all. Again, Emerald's motivation is to aid Cinder, who just happens to be in league with Salem. For Emerald to go back on this, you have to make Emerald realize that Cinder doesn't love her, and thus have her realize that her loyalties are wasted with her. But they don't do that. I think this moment Mercury has in telling Emerald off in Cinder's backstory episode was supposed to communicate Emerald realizing this, but girl, it don't hit. You don't intuitively see the cogs turning for Emerald here. You just see her being a bit sad that Cinder's being mean to her, which is nothing new. That happens on the regular. When Emerald decides to help Oscar and the others, she never once mentions Cinder, nor does anyone mention her to Emerald. Emerald has just completely switched allegiances and forgotten about her actual motivation, because to the writers, motives don't matter. Aesthetics matter. The aesthetic of Emerald redeeming herself was more valuable than actually having her see the light. Everyone expected us to do it, so we're just not going to put the effort in. Also, love that no one realizes Emerald is the reason why Pyrrha accidentally killed Penny in the first place. And that Emerald feels no guilt whatsoever about it, as Penny is once again fighting for her fucking life. How very satisfying to people who would wanted to see follow-ups to that drama all those years ago, back when the show actually held promise. And, ooh, I'm gonna sound real mean here. The music does not slay. Revisiting RWBY's music as a whole, I have found that while I do appreciate Jeff's attempt at expanding on the story through his songs, it's kind of clear he wasn't given much material to work with, especially from Volume 5 onward. It compounds upon the issues of his songs having increasingly muddy production, with instruments fighting for dominance and drowning out the vocals, the lack of variety as everything sounds like the same obligatory guitar solo, and crowded lyrics trying to cram too many syllables into every line. Jeff clearly is a talented musician who works hard, but it's also clear he was run ragged over the years, churning out soundtrack after soundtrack after soundtrack. Even the Volume 8 score is quite disappointing. Ordinarily, I appreciate the way character leitmotifs are woven together, because usually they tell better stories than the actual writing, but I can't remember a bit of Volume 8's score to save my goddamn life. Well, save for Cinder stealing Roman's leitmotif and the sorry excuse that is the truth. It was so clear Jeff was exhausted, especially as the fandom badgered him for the release of the Volume 8 soundtrack. And I feel for him. I hope he is enjoying his post-RWBY life and getting a breather. And I really hope this hasn't tainted his love for music, as is so often the case when your passion becomes your profession and you are treated like shit in that profession. That bridge in The Sky Is Falling, it may be a Lamar rap, but it really gives Jeff just confessing his exhaustion. There's plenty more about Volume 8 that I can't fucking stand, but I'm gonna cut myself off here, because if we continue, we will be here for 75 years. Suffice to say, Volume 8 is so rife with problems, and genuinely aggravates me to no end. Volume 9 is odd. Strangely, it represents both the best and worst of RWBY. It feels unnecessary, removing itself from its own plot for an entire season to needlessly expand lore no one asked for, and at points reads as brain-numbingly juvenile, uncreative, uninspired, and downright dangerous in its fumblings of serious topics. And yet, it is also the first and only time that RWBY has felt like not only the protagonist, but an actual character. Well, allegedly. It took excising the entire cast of screen hogs and eliminating the world-saving plot that many cite as their reason for abandoning the show, for the girls to feel like protagonists again. It strangely echoes a lot of the mundane, lighthearted antics of the first couple volumes, which feels so inappropriate given the world is literally on fire and ending, and also odd given most of our girls are still somehow in very sour moods. Yang specifically is a killjoy. Oh Jesus. Its release also warrants interest. Before Volume 9, RWBY volumes had a pretty consistent, horrifying schedule. Start in the fall, end in the spring, and then start up again the following fall. The wheels of the sweatshop go on and on. But after Volume 8 wrapped up in the spring of 2021, Volume 9 didn't premiere until the late winter of 2023, 2 whole years later. And by that point, alongside general waning interest in the show, disdain towards Volume 8, and all of the controversy surrounding the Chicken Tooth Company, Volume 9 was entering a climate where the world had moved on from RWBY. Or really, the world had moved on for a long while, but even a lot of the diehards who kept the show afloat found themselves leaving RWBY behind. The way it was released didn't much help either. Where previous volumes were part of the Rooster Teeth First program, hosted exclusively on the company's website, Volume 9 was held hostage on Crunchyroll for a year before moving to the Rooster Teeth site, just months before the company's closure. Not to mention that the delay was also due in part to the mishandling of projects, slave-driving animators on 2 Justice League crossover movies that literally no one asked for. The spell had been broken, and in the aftermath, it is no wonder Rooster Teeth went belly up. The tale of Volume 9's creation is arguably more interesting than the volume itself. Lord knows it's more interesting than the first half of the volume, where Team RWBY wanders around hideous environments that burn out my retinas, providing comedy that wouldn't seem out of place on Disney Junior. Seriously, what happened to the comedy from Volume 2? Why did it all become so much slower and Dumber. But there are things here that hold interest, namely the villains. I dig the Curious Cat as a character, in no small part thanks to Robbie Damon giving it his all. It's giving Deadpool asking Celine Dion to dial back her 11 to a 5. But even writing-wise, the cat has an actual motivation, an insatiable curiosity driving them to commit heinous acts just for answers. This is the kind of motivations-based villain writing that Salem and the rest of the antagonists are sorely lacking, which doesn't inspire much confidence since the cat themselves acts very erratically, at times forgetting their motivation, being inconsistently written, making no sense, and just in general, it's the Cheshire Cat, but like evil. Wow, how original. I'm so fearful of the cat whose color is the color of missing textures in 3D software. And truthfully, I had lost interest in Neo in Volume 8. She lost all the fun, playful charm she possessed in earlier volumes, and I found her desire for revenge against RWBY incredibly cliche and uncompelling. It was so clear she'd only been brought back to revive fan interest. Remove her and nothing about Volumes 7 and 8 would change, which is so frustrating because you could just have her posing as other characters to stir the pot in Volume 7. But I digress. And so finishing her story here outside of the plot with Salem makes sense, in the sense that we're admitting that she has been a walking dead end, especially in a realm so strange it pairs perfectly with her reality warping semblance. She gets to be a threat all of her own without any other villains getting in her way, and she's so cruel it actually kind of makes her interesting again. Not sure why we forgave her for making RWBY, want to unalive herself, but okay. But on the note of the RWBY torture ascension, I don't mind the concept on its own all that much, since to me it reads as a form of rebirth or a reincarnation, but many have read this as an allegory for self-harm and the other S word that I'm not allowed to say on YouTube, especially paired with RWBY's self-loathing. Admittedly, I have dealt with these feelings in the past, and RWBY's struggle most definitely echoed how I felt in those dark depths. The idea of dying and coming back stronger could have worked if it weren't paired with RWBY's very real feelings of self-loathing. Like, good lord, why did y'all write it like this? It's really glorifying the self-unaliving, which is gross. The episode where she sees all her dead friends along with Clover and Leo for some fucking reason, how would Neo even know about them, feels gratuitous. It's giving edgy torture, other word I can't say on YouTube, that we're using to make our show more shocking and supposedly mature. Like we did with all the Oscar torture last volume. And her choosing herself, admittedly, Guide My Way slaps and is one of my favorite songs, and I love RWBY actually fighting with her scythe the way that she used to against the cat, even if it only lasted 10 fucking seconds. But all that aside, this rings hollow. RWBY didn't have to actually face her mistakes or grow as a person. She just said, "I love myself," and that's all it took. It feels like the writer saw all of the recent media with a similar choose yourself messaging and lazily copied it, which does track considering RWBY is a hodgepodge of that. See something in another piece of media you like, mimic it without understanding why it worked originally, and make a half-assed version of it with no soul of its own. And while RWBY finally got something to work with, I am very bitter that it took a goddamn decade for her to get anything. And what she did get was pretty haphazard, choppy, underwhelming, and at parts downright dangerous for people who might be struggling with these kinds of things. I really dread to think how this might affect someone in the same straits as RWBY, because in our world, you don't get stronger when you do what she does. You're just gone. Not to mention that Weiss, Blake, and Yang get nothing. Their smoke cloud scene also pisses me off as the writers pretend that they've written fabulous journeys of growth and change. Once more, it is the illusion of a story we were promised, but never got. Seriously, what the fuck with Blake's though? Like, you could be a girl, or you could be like a cat. Like, what? What the fuck does that mean? Blake and Yang finally get to confirm their relationship, which, why the fuck did that take a decade? In the words of my friend Maxwell Media Inc., y'all are equating time with work. Just because it took this long does not make it worth the wait. And no, I don't care if this was planned or not, because even if it was planned, it's still bad. And it's still queer bait. It wasn't a will they, won't they. It was a are they or are they not queer. At so many points, the writers could have confirmed the girls were queer, but they didn't. They could have had them date earlier, but they didn't. because we don't want to scare off the homophobic reactionary viewers who also give us money. Because in reality, most of RWBY's audience, and Rooster Teeth's by extension, were men of that demographic. We will not risk it until the very last minute when we need a Hail Mary as our company lies dying on the floor. Oh yeah, and Jean's here. I don't fucking care. It's just more angst about his failures and the red-headed women he's killed. Even in a volume that's just about Team RWBY, we cannot escape Jean. And I can't find his angst over wanting to protect the paper pleasers compelling, because once again, he is getting more of an arc than Weiss, Blake, or Yang, because it is so clear the writers favor anyone who is not on Team RWBY. The Ever After is an interesting location, I guess. And while some environments hurt my eyes, others are quite pleasing, like the Paper Village. Fuck, is that a pun? And the Ponderstorm or the Lily Marketplace. But it all just reads as a lazy Alice in Wonderland clone. We're not really having fun in reinventing these tales the way it felt when RWBY did in its first couple volumes with its characters. Though I will say, if you want Volume 9 to matter, have them send Salem to the tree to get ascended, and maybe the blacksmith will help her ascend into something less homicidal. Just saying. At the very least, the music is a genuine plus. Casey and her band, OK Goodnight, took over the reins from Jeff, and they knocked it out of the fucking park. Their music has this ethereal quality in its production, and I adore the unusual structures that are more than just verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. And more wildly, I am glad RWBY ended before OK Goodnight could be drained dry by Rooster Teeth like Jeff was. And really, I'm okay with RWBY ending here. If we're being real, the Relics and Maidens plot was the sore spot for a lot of people, distracting us from the fun character antics that we loved beholding in the first 3 volumes. Volume 9 at least tried, or pretended to try, to return to these roots. And symbolically, I kind of love that it ends subtly saying that all the Ozpin and Salem shit doesn't fucking matter. The girlies matter. Well, really, just RWBY, but I'll take what I can fucking get at this point. Even if RWBY had a very unsatisfying arc, and the other 3 didn't have an arc, Volume 9. The more I think about Volume 9, the more I dislike her. Much like RWBY herself, the show RWBY is ascending. What will she be when she exits the tree? No clue, but as Blake says, maybe that's not for us to decide. Maybe it's time to let RWBY go and move on to the rest of the media landscape. Honestly, since those days where I've expanded my media diet, I don't really get hiatus brain anymore. If something ends, I just kind of move on to the next thing, and it's a delightful feeling. RWBY will always hold a special spot in my rotten, corrosive heart, for better or worse, inspiring both love and rage, both admiration and disappointment. It is more complicated than I love this show or I hate this show, because it is both and also neither, even though I know a good chunk of you will refuse to hear that. I'm not sure how I'll approach RWBY going forward, but I know I want to be more than just this or just Winx or just anything else. I want to share so much about all the media that fascinates me. And I think in that, this has felt quite cathartic. The official end of an era. But I think RWBY has taught me, and I think it should teach a lot of us, that we need to be more than the things and stories we consume. They can hold significance to us, but it is incredibly dangerous to tie our senses of selves to the things we consume or the things that we like. They can be part of us, but they cannot be all of us. Because if all of who you are is that, it is incredibly easy to destroy that. And it's very difficult to rebuild. I'm just imagining what would have happened to me if I didn't make my White Fang video, if I had stayed on my pink washing route from volumes 6 and 7, still white knighting the shit out of RWBY, still trying to delude myself into thinking it was this masterpiece. Would I have changed my mind? Or would I still be the way I was then? What would be my reaction to the demise of Rooster Teeth and the lackluster quality of volumes 8 and 9? There's no real way to know, and there's no point in asking, but it is a thing I'm curious about, I must admit. But I think I'm quite happy with how things have shaken out, and I'm excited for the future. RWBY will always be a thing that I hold on to dearly, that I think about every now and then. It will be a thing that pulls on my heartstrings, that I make redesigns and little 3D models for, that I make little cursed rewrite outlines for. But it won't be all of me, and it shouldn't be all of you either. Anyhow, if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this from me, then be sure to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications because YouTube hates creators. Also, please consider, if you're willing and able, pledging your support over on Patreon. I'm the Unicorn of War, and RWBY may have been a shit show, but she was my shit show.